Hi, I'm Kathleen Estes from Life Family Media, and we're so glad you've joined us for this series on faith, family, and infertility. We know that God is the giver of life, and He's the one that writes our stories. For my husband and I, we built our family through adoption, but we know that there are so many different ways that God loves to build families. We want to share some of those stories to inspire you. Hi, I'm Kathleen Estes from Life Family Media. We're so glad you've joined us today for our series on faith, family, and infertility. I am thrilled to introduce you to an amazing woman. This is Trish Hassell. Thank you so much for being with us today and being willing to share your story.
Thanks, Kathleen.
We know that God's the giver of life and that each of us kind of have our own journey. And sometimes it doesn't exactly go the way that we think it's going to happen. So take me back to the beginning when you and your awesome husband, Sean, decided you wanted to have a family.
Wow, that's a great question. Well, I grew up around kids my entire life. My dad and mom actually got married really young.
Okay.
And they didn't have formal education, so they had kids young, and so just to make ends meet, my dad was actually in a motorcycle accident, and so they had to really utilize their resources, and so my mom opened up a daycare system in our home.
Okay.
And so like our living room had giraffe wallpaper, it was blocks everywhere. I mean, it was like a full-blown nursery and childcare. And so I'd grown up around kids my entire life. So for me, like, when did I know I wanted to have a family? It was when I was like 4, basically, and growing up around all these children.
Yeah.
And went to school at Michigan State University for early childhood. Knew that I was passionate about teaching, which I thought young children, because that was I felt like my calling. And so I knew that I had always wanted kids. And when Sean and I met, that's always something that you talk about, right?
Yeah.
What do you like to do? What do you like to do? Do you want children?
Right.
And so we both wanted a family, and we got married. And we just loved each other's company so much that we waited a while.
Okay, I get that totally.
Yeah, I mean, we traveled. I finished my schooling to be an elementary building principal, and we knew we wanted kids, but we weren't ready. We just wanted to have fun. We had a lot of fun together. Still have a lot of fun together.
That's good.
That's important. Good. Very important, especially, through the years. And so it was about year 7 we were married, and we were like, we should really start trying. And there's a lot of times when people get married, they're like, we're just having fun, and it's just gonna happen when it's supposed to happen. And we were preventing it from happening. And so we thought that first time that we tried, we were like, God was going to be like, here it is.
Yes.
And that didn't happen.
Right.
And so, we were married 7 years when we started trying. And then when we started trying, because we had been married 7 years, we were in our, 30s. Then it had really stirred up in our hearts that we knew we wanted a family.
Okay, so when I met you, you were at the point where you were deciding to adjust your career. I think the job you were in was so stressful, and you guys were pursuing some medical advancements to help, and you were in transition. So tell us a little bit about what that looked like.
Yeah, so I was a teacher for 5 years, and then became an elementary school principal, and was contemplating, do I go back for my superintendent certification? Do I get my PhD? And I was a building principal and was recruited to do coaching consulting, which I felt like was my dream job. I was traveling to Washington and California, and Sean was going with me, and he was working from home. So we were able to do these great things together. And it was one of the best years of my life, because I got to just work with schools and pour into them. And we were struggling with trying to make doctor appointments and doing these injections and carrying the medicine on the plane. And it was just a lot.
Yes, it's stressful.
Yeah, it was really stressful. And by that point we had been struggling with the infertility for years. And so, there was a point where I was like, what do we do? Do we sell the house? Do we buy a tiny house? It was, for me, it's like, we'll do whatever we have to do. Sean's like, whoa, do we really? So, but I knew that I couldn't continue to do what I was doing and have my hand in the infertility, because I had dabbled with both as a building principal and then with my current company, and it wasn't working. And so we did make the decision where I took a different position in my company. They were so gracious to me that allowed me to work more flexible hours. It allowed me to work primarily from home. And so I was no longer traveling. But as hard as that was to, in my mind, I'm like, this is my dream job, but God had a different plan for me and my career. And I knew that I could still influence people and have impact even in a different career path.
I think as women, that's part of the struggle through all this too. Because there's the financial aspect of pursuing the medical field to help that can be overwhelming. There's our career goals, which we're like, well, is this the reason God's not blessing me with a child? Like, I feel like there's shame and so many emotions that go into what you were navigating at that time. So how did your spouse come and support you in a way that you would help other men know how can they help their wife as you were navigating that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for me, I feel between the two of us, and still honoring my husband, and he would say this too, I'm more the free spirit.
Okay.
I'm like, it'll just happen. And he's like, whoa. I'm like, we could, so I'm definitely more of the free spirit, where Sean is more conservative, which is good. We need to balance each other out.
Right.
And I think, to your question, how can men help, the wife, is really just looking at what is our long-term goal. What is, not where am I right now, but what is our long-term goal? And just because we're going to make a decision to, maybe go a different path, doesn't mean that we can't pick up that career again.
That's good.
And so I think the biggest thing I think that men or families can do is to be empathetic with how the woman is feeling, because it is a decision. It's not just and I remember I would be traveling and I'd be calling Sean from, hotels and being like, what are we doing? And I think one of the things that we learned early on in our marriage through marriage counseling is to just explore. Yes, like, should we sell our house and move into a tiny house? And Sean was probably thinking, this lady's lost her mind. If we have a lot of stuff to sell, we could do it.
Yeah.
But I think something that was helpful was, okay, Trish, what would that look like? What would that look like if we sold our house? Where would we go? How much money do we really need to go to this next phase of infertility? And so I think the best advice that I would give is to explore and to dream with your spouse and to have a deep sense of empathy while you're in that process, because you are doing it together. But if I was with couples and, we had an infertility support group, and what I saw was some men, they don't really know how to respond. They're like, well, we're not going to do that. Well, then in your mind, game on. Well, we're going to sell everything we own then. And so when somebody tells you no, then it triggers something in your mind to make you want it even more. And so I think just being open, being empathetic, hearing what that other person is saying, and just exploring.
Yeah. I love that you had a support group, an infertility support group. So tell me what that looked like.
Yeah, gosh, it's like, when do you go to this infertility support group? It's like, when is it? Is this infertility, or is this just taking me a long time here? And so there was Beth Moore at Life Austin. I remember I was sitting in church one day and crying because it's hard. We had gone through 11 rounds of artificial insemination.
11 rounds, like that's a lot.
It was a lot. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a lot. And at one point we're like, I think we need to talk with other people who are going through this. And we had a great life group. I tell people all the time, we moved to Austin from Michigan for the weather And part of the reason we didn't leave when we were doing all this transitioning was because of the church and our friends that we had found here.
That's awesome.
It is awesome. And I mean, I'm our first life group that when we were walking around trying to decide what life group do we want to be in, and, you know, Jody and Rob put their hands on my belly and they just started praying for us.
Right.
And so it was just that community. And so I'm
glad that didn't make you run.
No.
Because I remember people doing that to me and it was like,
and
maybe
they
you should ask.
Yeah,
okay,
they did
good.
ask. They weren't just like, Trish, come here. They're like, can we put our hands on you and pray?
Yeah,
and
good.
I'm a person of prayer. I'm like, I'll take all the prayer. And so, you know, we were sitting there. So we had support, of course, through our life group, just amazing, amazing friends. We had support there, but we knew that we needed people that were going through what we were going through.
Right.
And so what I loved was that it was actually a couples. So everybody came together, because a lot of times too, when you think of infertility, you think of the woman.
Yes.
But it's really...
It's both.
It's both. And so just being a part of that group, and I think what it did was it changed my paradigm on how I viewed what our next steps were. And it equipped me as we started going through, when we ended up doing the, when we decided in vitro was for us, when we were going through this process of, you know, at one point when we did the in vitro and we didn't think we were going to have any eggs and we ended up having 76.
Wow.
And the doctor said, how many do you want to keep of the eggs? And I remember, and I said, give us a minute to pray about this. So the doctor left, and we talked about this, and we said there were people in our infertility support group that didn't have any eggs.
Yeah.
We're not throwing away any. And so it was through that group that really changed my paradigm on what God was giving us and how to really make decisions through the process.
So talk to me a little bit. Clearly, you're a woman of great faith. So when did you feel free to pursue the medical advancements? Because I know for many of us as Christians and as believers, it's like we know God has the power.
Right.
You know, there's stories in the Bible of barren women, and we know God in a moment can open our wombs and give us that child we've been praying for. And it can be a struggle to know, is it okay to pursue these medical advancements to help bring life?
Right.
So how did you navigate that?
Gosh, that was probably, I think, one of the best God stories. And that was part of the reason when you said 11, I mean, most women don't try 11 rounds of artificial insemination. And when we went back to our fertility specialist, because my OB also did infertility, and he did a good portion of my artificial inseminations. When we went back to our infertility doctor, and he looked at us and he's like, what have you been doing?
Wow.
You've done this 11 times. Yeah. And he's like, you've wasted time. I'm now in my, mid to late 30s. And so that was the struggle, Kathleen, is that we kept saying, we will know when artificial insemination is no longer for us. And so we kept praying, and we never heard an answer to stop.
Right.
And so we continued to do artificial inseminations because we both were unsure with how far is too far, what is for medical advancement. And so we had, after our 11th, and we felt like God was saying, this artificial insemination is not for us. And it was interesting because that very first artificial insemination that we had, I am a woman of faith, and so is my husband is a man of faith, and we prayed and we declared for what we wanted. We didn't just say, and this is okay, I know, Lord, let your will be done. We were like, Lord, we want babies. Yes. We're getting older. We want two. We want a boy and a girl, and we want the boy to be born first, and we want the girl to be born second, and we want the boy to have my bones and the girl. And so we are very specific in our prayer.
I love that. And
after our first round of artificial insemination, you're like, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. I just need a little bit of medicine and so after the 11th round, so we really felt like, Pastor Randy talks all the time about how fasting is a prayer accelerant.
Yes.
And so, growing up in the Catholic faith, we never really were exposed to that type of prayer, like fasting is a prayer accelerant. And so we decided we did a Daniel fast. I have blood sugar issues, so I can't do a full-blown fast. And so we did a Daniel fast, and we said that we were just going to commit that weekend, those 3 days, to prayer to not going out, to having a Daniel fast, and just praying about, Lord, where are we supposed to go?
Yeah.
What are we supposed to do? And so what is that next step? And so we prayed Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday, we go to church. And this is such a God thing because, I've been in church my whole life, and never once in church did they talk about IVF, right? In vitro. I've never heard those words from a pastor or priest my entire life. And Alan Harrison, who was, running the hospital, was giving the sermon on what is too much, what is too far with, saving someone's life, with beginning life.
Right.
And he talked about how in Europe, and I remember he put it up on the screen, that there was in Europe the year prior, there was millions and millions and millions of embryos that were disposed.
Wow.
And I remember Sean grabbed my hand and I said, this has been our rock. This has been our issue. We felt, and everybody believes, everybody has different places of when they feel life begins.
Right.
For Sean and I, we felt that life began with that embryo.
Yes.
And so that was our struggle, was what do we do if we do IVF and we have embryos? What do we do? Because we had been with couples who went through IVF, who had embryos, who were emotionally distraught in it. What one person wanted to, the spouse wanted to do this with the embryos. This person wanted, and they couldn't make a decision, and it was hard. And so when he talked about how in Europe there was all these embryos that were disposed, and he said, could they have been put up for adoption? Because there's families and there's couples all over the world that want kids that can't have them on their own.
Right.
And so we left, and I remember we went home and we said, we were sitting on the chairs out overlooking the hill country, and we said, that was it. That's been our struggle, is what do we do if we are blessed with embryos? What do we do and if we have extra? So we did a lot of research, and we ended up finding a fertility clinic out in Dallas for a program that we qualified for. But then also had an adoption clinic, program coordinator that you could work with in the event that you did have extra embryos. So for us, it was an answered prayer. It was, Alan Harrison's message, which there's a really cool story about that, because a couple of years later, somebody had contacted me in the church and said, hey, we've got one of our members, their daughter is struggling with infertility. Would you be willing to talk with them? I think they live in a different state. And so I said, sure. And so I talked to this gal, found out it was Alan Harrison's daughter.
That's incredible.
It's so incredible.
I just love how, we as the body of Christ, as a family, can come together and support one another and inspire one another. And just the beauty of your journey, that God set up that for you, that Alan was speaking that Sunday morning, and that it was a word that you guys needed to hear to unlock the next phase of what your story looked like. So, okay, I know you moved ahead with IVF, but there were some challenges within that for you physically.
There was, yeah. And so, we did the 11 rounds of artificial insemination. We went through IVF, and through that process, women who are struggling with infertility know, and people who have friends, they pump you with a lot of meds.
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do. And they change not just your body, but your mind. And you're like, and so lots of grace, friends. Give your friends lots of grace.
Please.
And so, and the meds are not cheap either.
No.
And so we were pumping my body up with all these meds, and we had hit, it was about day 7, when my levels were getting very, very high. And so the doctor called and they said, your levels are high. We're starting the cycle down. And I was like, whoa. Because I just pumped my body with about $4,000 of meds. And so I was like, I just kept hearing the Lord say, do not fear. And he says, okay, we'll keep going, but you have to get blood work every single day, and I have to know where your numbers are at. And so we tried to do all sorts of things. I mean, we Googled eating kale. I ate 2 pans. My husband bought 2 pans of kale to try to bring these levels down. I was like, I was just eating so much kale. And my levels got very, very high. And so my doctor, Dr. Koo out of Dallas IVF, amazing fertility doctor, said, I will let you get to 10,000. And then I have to shut the cycle down. Right. So my numbers got to 10,000, was day 9. And you know, the body, it's usually about day 14-ish where you have that you're going to ovulate and have the most eggs. And so he says, we have to shut this cycle down. We'll try again next month. And I said, well, we just pumped all these meds into me. Right. Let's see what we got. Just do the surgery and see what we have. And he said, Trish, it's very, very unlikely that you have any, because you're not, you know, the eggs get bigger, right? And they have to be a certain size to be able to pull them out. He says, you're not going to have any at day 9, and your levels are so high. If I did this surgery, this could be life-threatening. Wow. And I just kept hearing the Lord say, do not fear. And Sean was hearing, and I said, Sean, pray. Because I know what I want, right? But I said, pray. Is God telling you something different? And he said, I'm hearing the same thing. So I called our fertility doctor and I said, we're going to do the surgery. And he said, okay. He goes, please make plans and tell me what hotel you'll be at after we do the surgery, because you will need to be hospitalized. And I said, oh, okay. So we got up there. Now he's telling me that, there's not going to be, it would be very unlikely, right, that there'd be anything there. So we go up the night before and we we spend the night there, and he does the surgery. And that's when he comes in and he said, well, that was record breaking. And he said, I pulled out 76 eggs, and I've been doing this for years, and I've never pulled out that many eggs.
Incredible.
And so that, so he did say when we were there, and that was when we made the decision, we're going to keep them all. We're not going to give any eggs away or dispose any, and we'll see what the Lord does with them. And he said, stay local, because you're going to get ill. And this is it's a specialty. Like not every doctor knows how to treat this. And I said, well, we're going home. And I'm like, I Googled it. Everyone's a Google doctor. I just need
You're an expert.
I just need a lot of liquids and a lot of salt.
And kale.
And so I did get ill. I mean, I gained 12 pounds in about 12 hours. Your body feels, so what happens is when you go through that and they take out the eggs, your body starts to fill all those sacs up with fluid. Wow. And so I legit looked like I was 6 months pregnant, which is always a great feeling after you have. So, and then they let my body calm down. But yeah, so that whole process, just being in tune with the Holy Spirit gave me the confirmation that I needed to move forward with the actual process of IVF.
Oh, tell us a little bit about your miracle babies.
Yeah. So in that process, you're right. Like I did have some troubles trying to get them in, and then once they finally, and it's interesting. It was right around this time. So they let your body calm down, and then they put the embryos in. And so through that process, they can do genetic testing and gender selection. And while we thought that was a gift and a resource for couples, we didn't feel like it was what we were called to do. And so we didn't do any genetic testing or gender selection. And we just said, whatever God is going to give us, God's going to give us. And so we ended up having 22 embryos.
Wow.
Yeah, 22. And they put 2 in, and 2 took, and that's our sweet Noah and Bella. And it was really interesting because the day after, this has been a 7-year journey, and so and I was never. We weren't ones to be like, this is really private. We had church praying for us. Pastor Randy had prayer requests on his wall. We were like, we need prayer. Like, yes, it got hard after the 8th and 9th. I'm like, but the people who are going to pray are still going to pray. And I believe in prayer. And it was hard because it was that disappointment. Did it work? It didn't work. It was like that mass text of like, it didn't work.
Right.
And so we do IVF. They call us and they say they took, you're pregnant, but you don't know. Did both take? You don't really know what what's going on in there. And so we made the announcement. It's a beautiful announcement. God answers, and God answered our prayer, and miracles sometimes come in pairs. And the next day we were going out to do, I was so excited, right? I mean, this has been a long time coming, and we were going out to do our baby registry. The day after we made our announcements, it was 11 or 12 weeks exactly to the date. And I'm standing in the kitchen, and I start hemorrhaging. And what's going through every woman's mind when you start bleeding when you're pregnant. And we called our fertility doctor, and he answered the phone. What a good doctor who answers their phone on a Saturday morning at 8:00. And he said, give her a shot and get her to an emergency room. And so we went to the emergency room. And I remember I sent out a text message just saying, please pray. Yeah. And I remember my mom, I called her, and she said, I know what's going through your mind. Don't let your mind go there. Yeah. Put on Christian music and drive to the hospital. Yeah. And that's what we did. We drove, and we just continued to pray and praise him and worship him. And then you get to the emergency room, and you're just like, please just hear those heartbeats. Yeah. Hear those heartbeats. And they said, we hear one. And then they waited another minute, and they said, we hear another one. And they said, you have a very high risk for miscarriage, 50% chance actually. So what had happened was I had subchorionic hemorrhages in each placenta. So both of them. And so they said it was a 50% chance of miscarrying. And, we went home, and I thought for sure, I'm like, I'd be on bed rest. I'm like, I'm be feet up in the air for, the next, 6 months. And those babies sat there till 38 weeks. It was like the Hotel California. It was like we couldn't get them in. And once we got them in, we couldn't get them out. And so at 38 weeks, the doctor says, I think we're going to have to go in and get them. And so Noah was born first, 6 pounds, 11 ounces, healthy boy, still very healthy. He's 5 now. And Bella was born at 5 pounds, 9 ounces 1 minute after. So we got our boy. Noah was born. If you've seen him, which you have. Oh my goodness. I'm telling you, he is all boy. He is all boy. I love looking at your family because Bella's such all girl, like the little delicate, like so sweet. And then Noah is like a truck, like he's going to be a football player, I'm thinking. Yeah. But there's so much joy because your journey had so much heartbreak and highs and lows, those dark nights of the soul, that your family just exudes the love and the joy and the promise of God that it's so beautiful to watch you guys walk into church on Sunday and just to see the promise of God displayed in your family. Well, thank you for that. And I feel like I had said, what brought us here was, Michigan's cold and we love Texas. And I felt like the church community and, Beth, who started the Infertility Support group, and Pastor Randy and, Pastor George, and just these people that, how many times after service did we go up, and you were there too, Kathleen, and praying over us. And we really just felt like God's hand was in this church and put people in our life to not just say, hey, I'm going to pray for you. And then they maybe don't, right? But it was, I remember we knew that this was a church of prayer when we had Noah and Bella dedicated by Pastor Randy after they were born. And he, we were all in a line, and he says, I'm coming back to you, Trish. I said, okay, you come back to us. And he said, every week for 7 years, I got a prayer request. I want a baby. I want a baby. And now you have 2. Yes. And I think that just shows too, when you have good leadership and people who say they're going to pray for you, who really do, because we are a big church, but we're small and mighty, and we just felt that the presence of God was here. How blessed are we that we had a pastor, right? Mm-hmm. That prayed for us every single week. Yeah. And so, it was just, it's beautiful. And they are just, I say they're full of love, life, and testing boundaries. And I tell everybody I could run a school of 1,000 kids. And when it comes to my own too, I'm not really quite sure. And when I didn't have kids, I had hundreds of solutions for parents.
Of course, we all do.
And now I have 2 and I have 0 solutions. I don't really know. But they are, they're 5. They just started kindergarten, and they are just full of life. And now we are open with them about our journey. We actually got to go as a family about 1.5 years ago, before we decided to finalize and put the embryos up for adoption. We went as a family, and they brought the big tube system cylinder out to us, and we explained to the kids that in there are 20 brothers and sisters that you have, and we are going to bless other families.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and so we finalized that process, and they could literally have 20 brothers or sisters eventually running around. Wow. So we tell them, because if you go to college,
right,
you really get along with somebody and you are attracted to them, you might want to check that out, because but we feel like last night I was hosting Bible study with some girls in the neighborhood, and we went around and we talked about who is God to us? Who is God? Who is God to you? Who is God to us? It was very interesting how we all had different, of course we all believe that, God is all-knowing and powerful.
But there's many facets.
There's many facets, yes. Right. And I said, I believe that God works for the good of all things. And, for me, as I was going through the infertility journey, I always said, like, when an artificial insemination didn't work, I didn't say it didn't work. I said it didn't work the way we were thinking it was going to, because we knew that God's hand was on everything and that he had a master plan. Right. And as we went through the process, when Noah and Bella were born, 5 years ago, I said, well, this is exactly why we didn't have babies, 6 years prior, whatever it was, because this is who God had planned for us. And I do believe that to be true. But I think, Kathleen, what if it's bigger than us? What if mine and Sean's infertility journey isn't about just us and our family? Right. But maybe it's about somebody else's family, that I feel like I was the vehicle, right, to have these embryos, but they don't belong to me. Right. They belong to God. I was just the vehicle. He just used me as the vehicle to produce them. Yeah. And so I had to change my paradigm there, that they're not my embryos. They were never mine to begin with. They're his. And so I think, well, God works for the good of all things for my life, because look at my 2 beautiful children that I have. Right. But what if it's beyond? Yeah. Which I believe it's beyond just our family, but God works for the good of all things for the other families that he's going to continue to bless, for those couples that couldn't, for whatever reason, get an embryo inside them, and now the woman's going to be able to carry it in her own womb and have these beautiful children. Yeah, no, that's beautiful, and I totally agree that we're a steward of our lives. We're a steward of our children. They do. It all does belong to God. Yeah. I do want to ask just a couple of quick questions. What is one of the dumbest things that people said to you while you were in this journey? Like, if there are friends out there who have couples that they know that are walking through this, what should they avoid saying or asking or doing? Yeah, that's a great question. And this morning when I was talking with Sean, as I was getting ready, I said, and you're we've been married almost 20 years now. I said, and we've walked this journey together. I said, what's something that you've learned from this? Like, you saw me, like, through, and you went through pain too. And we talked about it. And I think something to remember is everybody has a story.
Right.
And it's not just like, well, what could your friends say? But when you see people, when you work with people, when you are around people. So I was a building principal working with children.
Right.
And I think some of the most hurtful things that I heard were, well, you don't have kids, Mrs. Hassell. So do you really? Yeah. And they weren't saying it to be nasty. I don't think anybody got up that morning and said, I want to be nasty. No. But that's in their mind. They're like, well, how can you don't have kids? And I think probably one of the most hurtful things that we could say is you don't know somebody's story. And I say that because people would ask us, well, do you want children? You've been married we were married 14 years before we finally had them. And so we don't know somebody's story.
Right.
And so I think just not assuming, and what if I didn't?
Right.
What if I went through that journey and we had decided not to pursue IVF and we didn't have children? And so to ask somebody, well, don't you want kids? Does that make me any less of a person? Or now having my own children has changed my perspective, but to say that I would be an incompetent or I wouldn't succeed as a teacher or a building principal because I don't have my own was hurtful.
Yeah. No, I totally get that. What advice do you give to someone that's watching today that's at the beginning of their journey?
Yeah, gosh, that's a great question. I think the best advice that I could give would be to pray for what you want, declare for what you want on your family and what you envision that. And after every procedure, artificial insemination, put your mind in that space that this is going to work. And so after every artificial insemination, I would look at baby pictures, I would look at birth announcements, and I would put my head in that space. And a lot of people would say, don't go there, don't, because you might be disappointed. But I wanted my mindset to be such that I know that this is God's will for my family.
Yeah.
And so to not give up hope, to don't shy away from, oh my gosh, it didn't work. I don't want to get my hopes up. Get your hopes up.
Yeah.
Pray for it. Declare it on your life and share with people, because people, I believe, have good in them and want to help. And so that would be my biggest advice would be pray, declare for what, declare what you want on your life, and be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Be vulnerable to the process, and know that God does work for the good of all things. And sometimes we know why something happened, and sometimes we never know why.
Right. I know there's some things that I look forward to one day being able to ask the why, but on this side we might not know. But thank you so much.
Thank you,
for
Kathleen,
being willing to share your story. And we hope that that's encouraged you today, wherever you're at on your journey. Know that God loves you and you're not alone.